Another episode of the Rapid Agency Growth Podcast, where we talk about how you can rapidly scale your digital marketing agency. And we also bring on other subject matter experts who can enlighten us with their wisdom so that we can grow faster as well. Now, you might be watching this on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, or you might be catching the replay on Apple or Google podcasts. And if you're not in our Facebook group for digital marketing agency owners who are looking to grow, who are still getting to that six-figure mark, maybe the first $250,000. What are you doing? Come and join our community of 3,000 other like minded individuals who are there to help you grow. Find the link above or below this video or go to smmamastermind.com. Enough of that. I have a very special guest joining me from North Carolina who has a great history as a corporate leader, and he's also been running his own businesses for over a decade now. And what we are going to talk about is culture, why it's important, what is it, and how can you harness it to grow your business. Jason Kanigan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks for the chance
Thank
to be
you.
here.
Thank you so much for joining me. Now, Jason, for the people who might be watching or listening to this who don't know who you are, how about a little bit of an introduction?
Oh boy. Well, I
Or a long one.
I got an actual operations management education in the 90s. So real process engineering, factory management. I was a plant manager when I was 25. When I was 26, I had 150 people working for me and discovered I hated it. It
Oh,
was not
nice.
what I wanted to do. So today, after a long and varied career, I'm a member of the board of advisors of the Operational Excellence Society and hang out with people who are the OPEX people for Visa and bigger companies, around the world. And I also support, mostly we work in space and defense. Cold Star Tech here is my company. However, we also support agencies of a certain size, say,
Mhm.
500,000 and up, installing processes and systems that make sense for you so that you can grow and stop worrying about, did we miss anything?
Absolutely. And I
Mhm.
think, I wanted to get you on here today because this topic of culture is so important. I know you're working with the big boys, but often once you hit your first 50,000 revenue mark and you are thinking about expanding your team and bringing people in, that's probably when the first time culture comes to your mind. So let's start with the basics here. How do you define what is culture?
Right. And you said that, what is it? And I was like, ooh, I don't really have a definition, right? It's kind of the vibe of the organization.
Right.
And I think that comes back a lot to every organization, including mine, that's created is a neurotic output of the founder, right?
Mhm.
It is a projection of the founder. It has the same strengths and weaknesses that we have. And then if we're smart, we'll acknowledge that and go find people to make up for those, right? And plug those gaps. There's no point in trying to make yourself better in your weakness areas, right? Play to your strengths. But
Yeah.
the vibe, really, when I come down to it, it's like, what is the attitude of the leadership towards suggestions, for example,
Mhm.
from below, feedback from below? That is just a great starting point, right? If they're closed off and not open to it, and want to just kind of mock what is
Right.
suggested, then that's probably a bad culture. However, on the other end of things, a culture where there's no conflict, zero conflict, that's terrible as well.
Mm.
You actually want some, right? The high conflict business is actually a well-running business, and without
Yeah.
any disagreement whatsoever, you will stagnate. So there's this real balance, right? And I think you're going to be constantly adjusting, but it is something that I believe should be deliberately created, and I think it should be co-created with your people. Although you can say we stand for these values, right? Values
Mhm.
and vision are certainly a part of culture,
Yeah.
uh, but they're not exclusive by themselves. So let's
Right.
stop there, and I'll let you
No,
poke
that's
him with
that's
a
fine.
question.
That's
Yeah,
great, because I think
yeah.
often when people think about culture, they're thinking more about benefits, right? They're thinking
Mm.
about healthcare and dental benefits, and an
Wow.
office with
Okay.
bean bags and
Yeah.
ping pong tables and a hip kind of a culture or
You're
something
not
like.
wrong though, because play, right?
Mhm.
Play, which is the beanbag culture or whatever, right? Can be an element of culture, right?
Right,
So
right.
yeah, let's
No,
go on from there.
absolutely. Now, I think a lot of people don't try to proactively create a culture. So
Mm,
as a business owner, when is the right time to actually kind of stop thinking about growing, more revenue, and actually ask the question, okay, what do we have to do now to actually
hmm.
sustain this growth and attract the talent we require to, either accelerate or sustain this level of growth?
Mhm. So, Abul, why does it have to be mutually exclusive, right? Why
Mm.
is it revenue growth or culture, right? I believe
Yeah,
actually culture fuels revenue growth when it's done right,
absolutely.
because when you have that trust in between your senior staff, for example, to get together and hash things out, right, and come at it and say, look, I have a different opinion from you.
Mhm.
We're not going to fight each other with knives to the death about it, but we are going to stand for what we stand for and try and come to a good resolution here, right? That's a good bit of culture. So, first point, the time to start creating a culture is after you've sold something.
Right.
Okay, and I've made this mistake in the past. I
Yeah,
even
how
started
how
this
many employees do they
organization.
need? I mean, do you start when you have your first hire,
Yes,
or you wait for
yes,
10, or.
and the funny thing, just by default, right, by them being around, those first employees will really impact the culture. And so, if you're not careful, some bad things may get in there, right?
Mm,
So I was very clear with this organization what the values were and what the culture I wanted to be like was. However, I'm also open to and a realist about it that the people involved are going to impact that culture as well. But and this is where vision comes in, where you're constantly telling your people over and over and over again what the vision is, right? What you stand for, because they don't know until you
mm,
tell them. And you got to tell them like 7 or 100 times, and finally it sinks in. But the beauty of it, once that culture is there and those values are known, that vision is known, they know what to say and do when you're not there.
right.
Right. And that's really what we're hoping for out of developing a culture, right? When I, the leader, am not around, what do my people do? How do they behave? And are they going to take a client or a prospective client through a process to a result that we all like, right?
Mhm,
Or are they going to run amok and do something like, a lot of agency owners are interested in having a great client experience.
yeah.
And my assertion is, if you leave culture to chance, to happenstance, to the default setting of the founder's personality, plus or minus a little bit of soup created by the employees who just happen to be there, right? You're not
Mhm.
probably, you're probably not going to get on the road to a great client experience just by default, right?
No,
So I
absolutely.
believe this is where culture is very important in creating those guiding lanes, right? Of,
Right.
okay, we will do this, we will not do that.
Uh-huh. And I suppose, you've worked with hundreds of different
Mhm.
companies. You said you've managed over 100 people at the age of
Mhm.
26.
Right.
What does bad culture look like then, just for someone who might be listening and thinking, I'm not sure if I've got a culture issue? What are the symptoms that they can check off the list?
Right. And it does not matter what size the company is, big or small. I have talked to Fortune 500 OPEX executives who will not come on my show, the Cold Star Project, to talk about OPEX and that,
Mm,
because the culture of their organization is so bad. They'll privately admit it to me, but they don't want to stick their neck out and say anything that might be construed as like antagonistic or weird, right? And
mhm.
outside of that opinion. So when, going back to what I said at the beginning, when people are afraid to speak up, when
Yes.
people are afraid to share their point of view, that's bad culture. When there's a tattletale culture, a bull took 10 minutes longer on his break than I did for my lunch,
Sure.
right? That's the reason I got out of factory management. Right.
Mhm.
I didn't want to run a little mafia village of tattletale kids. Right. I wanted Star Trek. I wanted people who showed up today to work on a team who were excited to be there and
Mhm.
didn't have to be prodded out of bed with a pitchfork to
Yeah.
get in and join, right? They
Mhm.
they were like, "Hey,
Mhm.
I'm here. You're awesome. I'm awesome. How can we work together, and how can I contribute to move the thing forward? So, bad culture, suppressive, looking over your shoulder, always wondering. When you have power hungry leaders that are
Right.
just interested in power and don't really care about
Yeah.
the employees and people, right? Not caring about people. But one thing that I do worry about, Abul, and I see this all over the place, is a culture where, again, that idea that people are to be manipulated or used as uh, almost like plot devices or something like that, right? They're chess pieces to be moved around a board, right? When we see that, it's time to get out of there. So there's a guy who I follow named Paul Wilkins, and he's a Dutch change management and high performance culture guy, and I've interviewed him for my show, and I consider him at a higher level than myself. And I have a lot of fun talking to him. And he sends an email around once in a while. It's always short, pithy, right? Really good stuff. But he said, um, you're in a good organization when you're allowed to take time off and step back, not on holiday, mind you, but
Right.
step out of the daily firefighting and do strategic thinking and come up
Mm.
with, all right, I've taken a breather. I've gotten out away from the flames and the smoke. What am I going to do to move the ball down the field forward? And I came back to him and I'm like, Paul, I love you. I love you, right? I believe in everything that you say, right?
Yeah.
But I haven't seen many organizations like that, right?
Yeah.
I've seen a hell of a lot of organizations where the culture is, especially in America, bust your butt, don't
Oh
take
yeah. Oh yeah.
holidays, right? How dare you not be working 60 hours a week if you're a
Well, we're
salaried
snowflakes
executive?
here in Europe, I'll tell
Right,
you that.
right, right. And so, when are you supposed to take this time? And how do you're going to get shot at if you do, right?
Hmm.
By your peers and your senior management and that. So this is all well and good in theory, but how does it work out in practice? And he said, well, Jason, you're right. And this is a screening thing to look for in the interviews when
Yeah.
you are looking to be hired by an organization. So those of you who are looking for executive roles, I just gave you a good hint there on how to
Hmm.
find a great culture organization where they recognize that you will have to take that step back, and
Hmm.
that their culture embraces that in order to come up with the strategic thinking to move the business forward.
Right. And you've mentioned a couple of ways that you can, notice good or bad culture depending on whether they're listening uh,
Hmm.
to the employees at different levels and whether they're micromanaging, etc.
Yeah.
I suppose for an organization that is proactively trying to build a positive culture now, something that we keep on hearing about in Europe at least is the Great Resignation, and I know so, you're getting
Yeah.
seeing some of that in the US as well, and people are putting it down to culture and how now
Hmm.
culture is catching up
Hmm.
with people being burnt out all the time. How can a leader in an agency or any other business
Hmm.
or a founder actually start implementing processes and practices that are going to lead to having a great culture?
Okay. So a lot of this, I have a lot of fun with this. I would go back to Dr. Russell Akoff, who probably nobody has ever heard of. He was
Mhm.
a systems thinker
Right.
and came up with a lot of ideas about involving people, starting with inner city schools, right, with black kids who didn't want to learn how to read. And he put on Charlie Chaplin films. They were silent films with
Okay.
subtitles. And so the only way the kids could learn to what's going on in the movie, right? And anybody could leave their class and go into the auditorium and watch this thing at any time, right? So and it's like reading had been labeled as a white person's thing and not cool and that kind of thing. But if you wanted to know how the Charlie Chaplin movie was going, you had to learn how to read. And
Right.
so the kids learned how to read themselves on their own, okay, without any
Wow.
prompting, without classes, right? It was just a great way to do it. So I go back to employee involvement, right?
Mhm.
The I worked and supported with a ton of vice presidents of sales in my lifetime, right? And those guys, they're not really interested in selling. What they are interested in is sitting behind their giant oak desk and looking at their pro forma spreadsheets and going, okay, we've got a revenue target here for the next quarter. upon which I'm going to make a massive bonus. So I'm going to beat people over the head, by calling them and getting on their case about
Right.
how are you going to do this, right? They did not care about what was actually going, nor did they have any clue what their frontline salespeople were actually encountering. And so that's a level of abstraction that's quite far away from the customer and your frontline salespeople, right? Or your customer service people, or your data analytics people who are touching the data and the customer, right? And so I recommend that you get back involved in talking to these people, right? At least some of the time, and finding out, what are you struggling with? How can I make your life better? What is it that's most frustrating for you about your job, right? And ACOF would have organized some sort of committee of employees at peer levels getting together and sharing ideas, because you have to share the reality of what's actually going on. What happens with business owners is that they get a mental movie running in their head about how they think things are going on in the world, in their business, right? And they're actually losing sight of it. And when we go in and we flowchart what's actually happening, interview the employees, and that, there's this divergence we find.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of inefficiency in there. And when we clean that up, it's a great benefit to the organization. But learning what your frontline people are actually doing, actually experiencing, not watching the mental movie in your head and assuming you know what's going on, and then letting them bring you the suggestions, right? And not just blindly or bluntly going, no, no, well, that's great, thank you, and then never doing anything about it, because then they'll lose faith in you, right? But
Right.
having a piece of the budget to implement
Mm-hmm.
some of that stuff, right? So that they're
Right.
co-creating in change management and in process improvement. There has to be a sale made to those frontline employees. Otherwise, they're just not going to do it. They're
Yeah.
not going to adopt the CRM. They're not going to follow your system. They're not going to use your program, right? They're going to hide stuff. They're going to use their own spreadsheets.
Yeah.
They're going to do what they're comfortable with, right? And so you need to get these guys, these ladies and gentlemen who are working for you, to be their own champions of
Right.
change, right?
Right.
Make them the champion of the improvement, or the documentation of the process, or the leadership of the process, right? And have them come to you with suggestions. And believe you me, when you're the founder, the division manager, whatever it is, in the leadership role, and you're responsible for all these people, and you don't have to come up with every single light bulb moment yourself anymore, and they're feeding these things to you, boy, is that a relief.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot of founders out there, I think, who have, are running these $100,000 or less agencies
Yeah.
annually, who have not experienced that. And it's
No.
unfortunate, because they believe that they're the source of all enlightenment, and nobody else could come up with anything, and they're just like, okay.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
And then you've got the smaller agency owners, but if you look at a big business, right, I do wonder, does corporate America
Hmm.
really care about culture? So let's use the late Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Brilliant man, but
Hmm.
awful to work with, from what I've heard
Many things, yes, many stories.
and read. I've heard, and I hope he doesn't sue me, Bill Gates can be quite erratic to work with, and he's got a temper. And Elon Musk is probably not very, very different.
Hmm.
Now, some would argue that, people would still be attracted to work at these organizations and companies that they have built, knowing that there is a really a high performance culture there, and that people don't always come first. Is
Hmm.
that still the case with a lot of these unicorn companies and these startups, that if you want to go and work there, you got to be willing to sacrifice your evenings and your weekends, because there's going to be a payoff at the end of the tunnel?
Possibly, if you have shares in the company, maybe you would be motivated to do that. If you're just a line employee, um, I, you said tons of, or lots of these unicorn companies. I don't know. That's a bit of a contradiction, right?
Yeah,
A
yeah, of
unicorn
course, of
company
course.
is by definition rare. I believe that the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks are quite rare, right? So
Mm,
that forceful, autocratic technocrat who wants to beat the hell out of everybody, in a way, and feels that and believes that that's the way to run the organization. Although, I've seen video of Steve Jobs in his earlier days, getting people together in groups and taking them out to retreats and kind of kicking them in the butt to come up with something. So it's like, okay, we hear stories. It's easy to say stories about people. I don't know. I haven't worked with any of those guys, and I'm not going to get
Right,
the
of
chance
course.
to work with at least two of them. So, so, but you know, it comes down to the values of yourself and whether you did a good job in filtering for the organizations that you go hire. Most people just, when it comes to job hunting, shoot out a blizzard or shotgun of blast of resumes, right? Do a
Yeah.
few interviews, get hired, and they're like, "Whew, I'm hired," because their focus is on how can I recover that revenue stream, right?
Mm,
How can I get my income back up to 50, 80, 100,000 a year or whatever it is, right?
sure.
That an executive deserves, and without interruption, right? With minimal interruption, and
Mhm.
instead, you should be doing what Paul Rolkin suggested, right? Which is interviewing those people and saying, "Look, what's the culture of your organization? Tell me about it. What happens if, right? I don't show up and work 60 hours a week. What happens if I go on a strategic retreat for a couple days? Like,
That's
what
a
happens?
fantastic question, to ask at your
Yeah.
next interview,
Oh,
especially if you're going to be a leader. What happens if
mhm.
I don't show up and work
Right,
60 hours a week, or,
right.
till the early hours of the evenings every day, or some weekends,
Hmm.
and
I
see
mean,
what the
in terms
response
of
is gonna be?
a sales conversation, Abul, that is the
Mm,
perfect time to do it because there's kind of an upward curve on a graph where they want you, they want you, they want you, they want you, and then when you're hired, they have you, and then your bargaining power just drops away to nothing because
mm,
you already agreed. So why not do that negotiation now, right up
mhm.
front during that interview process, and find an organization who's willing to work with you and who already has, hopefully, values and a culture that matches up with your own. But
Right.
most people are not clear.
Uh-huh.
They have no idea what they believe, and so they just go and oh, I got a job, yay.
Yeah. Now, some people might be quite cynical and they might be thinking, that focusing on culture and some of these other areas around, what we call EDI here, equality,
Hmm.
diversity,
Hmm.
inclusion, that kind of stuff, it's the zeitgeist, but it's a
Hmm.
distraction from
Hmm.
the core purpose of an organization, that it's a line that appears under the expenses table
Hmm.
rather than that something that can really drive revenue in the
Hmm.
short term. What would, I suppose,
Hmm.
you say to someone who is that cynic?
They're not wrong, right? It depends on the situation, and it depends on how that stuff is being used. It's
Right.
just a tool. It's a knife, right? I can
Mhm.
cut my steak, or I can stab you with it, or
Yeah.
threaten to rob you, right?
Yeah.
How am I using it? So, if it's being used as a weapon to
Yeah.
suppress people and tell you to shut up and watch your P's and Q's and all that stuff, no, I don't like it. If
Mhm.
it's used to make sure that everyone's properly respected, right? And
Yeah.
that we're not running around being racist or sexist, right?
Mhm.
I worked for women several times in my life. The longest job I ever had, 4 years, was working for a woman, and I loved it. It was
Mhm.
great, So and again, I'm originally Canadian, so maybe there's some values differences that are kind of
Oh,
baked
right.
into
You
the
should have said
culture,
that to
right,
begin with. That
of
would
the
have been
country.
easier on you.
No, it's okay. I can take it. I've been in America for a dozen years now, and I've
Right.
become more American than Canadian. But again, um, if it's just diversity and that stuff for the sake of having it,
Mhm.
then it's just yeah, kind of a weird bar. You will see um, the, the real measure of the game is, are you making money?
Yeah.
Right? Are you adding
Yeah.
value for your clients and customers? And are you making money on the back end, right? Which keeps people
Mhm.
employed. It allows us to improve our situation, whether it's as an individual or as a company, right?
Mhm.
But if you see these young guys who get venture capital money and they go and they blow it, right? They get several $1 million. They go
Yeah.
build or rent a facility, and then they put in the cereal bars and the beanbag napping chairs and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
I like a nap as much as anybody, but and there's no revenue.
Yeah.
You have failed, right?
Yeah.
You have made a terrible mistake and should have put that money into revenue generating activities. And
Mm.
then when the surplus allowed you to reinvest and build some more of those things, right, out, like Google, right?
Mhm.
They did not create a giant group of campuses out of nothing, right?
Yeah.
That stuff, but also look what they do, right? Part of once a week, part of a day is that coder or that person is allowed to go off and do what they want, develop
Yeah.
something themselves, right? So in my case, when I bring somebody on board, I'm going to find out about them. I care about the Myers-Briggs stuff, the four
Oh
sides
yes.
of the mind, DISC, that kind of
Cool.
thing. I'm going to find out what kind of person are you, what motivates you, what do you like. And if I found out, Abul, that you were a photographer, right, I would figure out a way for you to involve your photography skill and passion with the organization.
Mm.
So if we had live events, I'd be like, I'm going to pay you to walk around with this camera and take photos at our trade show or of our products or something like that. And you would be tickled pink, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Right? You'd be
Yeah.
like, ooh,
Absolutely. Oh,
right?
well, I
Not
love
only am
my boss.
yeah, not only am I doing my job, but I'm also doing this secondary or tertiary thing that allows me to use a skill that I don't normally use.
Mm.
And they're paying me for it. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, right? And you are adding value to me and the organization in an unexpected way,
No,
right?
that's
And
absolutely
that's part
awesome.
of the culture of Cold Star, right?
Yes.
Where I want people spending some time expressing themselves because I like that, right? I like to express myself up here on this show.
That's awesome. So when you start working with a client,
Hmm.
you know, whether they be in the defense space or
Hmm.
be a business or an agency, you know, what does your process look like? You know, what are the areas that you explore, and what are you actually looking for?
Okay. So the main thing that I do is I look for three things, right? And I
Mm,
would teach people doing. I've been a sales trainer for 10 years, and I'll say the same thing. I would have said the same thing in 2011. Okay, need, budget, and personality fit. Okay, and we're having this conversation before any money changes hands, right? And I have the ability to say no at any time until I've
mhm.
taken that money, right? So I'm looking for, do you have a problem that I can solve? Do you
Sure.
admit to having it, right? If you don't, why are we talking, right? And I'll get to this stuff in 4 minutes, right?
Right.
Do you have a large enough problem to warrant my involvement? Okay.
Mhm.
Jason Kanigan does not solve $300 problems. He does not sell $4 candied apples. And that's my money tolerance and what I'm used to,
Absolutely.
right? What I'm comfortable with. So there are people out there, the Ron Popeys of the world, who can sell that rotisserie chicken cooker for $20 a piece and make zillions of dollars, way more than I make, right? But that's
Mhm.
just not me. I'm
Sure.
not interested, right? So I have a minimum price that I go to work for, and I work with the client to figure out, okay, how big is this problem?
Sure.
You tell me, I don't tell you, we figure it out together, and then I charge 5 to 10%, and it's an easy yes at that point. Okay, and if that number, that 5 to 10%, is below my minimum, sorry,
Right.
I'm going to refer you to somebody else. But the third thing is the personality fit, and guess what's in there? Culture.
Oh.
Values, right?
Gonna
How
get
do
there.
you
Sure.
treat people, right?
Mhm.
If I go to work, or I'm about to go to work with somebody who runs a construction company, who
Yeah.
needs processes written down and all that, right? And the guy gets interrupted 3 times during our conversation by subcontractors calling in and talking to him on his cell phone, and he starts screaming at them. Well, that's a red flag, right? How long is it going to be
Absolutely.
until I'm the guy
Mhm.
who's
Mhm.
being screamed at when I say yes, let's work
Yeah.
together? So I'm
And
looking for those three things. Then we run typically an assessment, which goes through the organization and talks to them. And the secret here, Abul, is getting the leaders, the CFO, the COO, and everybody in the same room. And we go through a number of areas in the organization with this thing, and it shows, like, you as the CFO will have a different point of view than I as the COO, and we didn't know that
mhm.
until Jason's company led the
Yeah,
process, right?
100%.
And
Course.
there's value right there, right?
Yeah.
And then coming out of that, there's a report that says, okay, I think you should work on this, this, and this in this order, and then we start knocking those things off
Right.
as a project. However, getting the processes and systems understood and in place is key, because remember that mental movie thing I was talking about,
Mhm.
right? Typically, when we get that nailed down for the very first time ever, that company owner knows what's happening.
Mhm.
Right? And we actually celebrate that moment. It's like, woo, we got it, right? And then
Yeah.
we can look at, okay, should we improve this stuff? Let's look at the steps in the process. There's an operation and inspection, whatever. Should those be there? Should we cut them out? Should we combine them? Right?
Right.
What should be happening here to improve things? So and that's a big chunk of it. But
Right.
sometimes I do get into the, hey, let's talk about managing change and
Sure.
corporate development, company culture, and that kind of thing.
Right. And being an ops man, how many
Mhm.
times out of 10 would you say when you go in and look at an organization, you see issues due to culture versus competence?
Right. So the very first episode of the Cold Star Project, my show, Abul, is you have a people problem, not a technology problem. So that should answer your question. It's all the time. Yeah, it's not about the systems because, my friend Jeremy Pope and I used to run a business called the Closing Engine, and we used a project management software that's very well known, Asana,
Oh
and
yeah.
at one point we're like, we hate this, we hate this. It's not working right. It's not telling us what we want. We don't have our single source of truth. We're losing things. What's happening, right?
Oh yeah.
And it wasn't the software. It turned out it was us. Oh no, right? We wiped everything that we were doing in Asana and redid it. We used the same software, the same
Hmm.
tool, but got a completely different result because of the way we were using it and the way we were
That's
thinking
so
about it and
interesting.
approaching it, right? So it's always people. There's an organization with a 3-letter name that has been selling software to bigger companies for decades, and their insistence is you use this and you become a mini me version of us. And guess what? Those companies are not really doing any better after all this
Mm,
time, right?
mm.
They've sold a lot of product and
Yeah.
they have installed a lot of systems, but the organizations are not better off because the culture is missing something.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, we
Hmm.
can go on about
We
this
could.
forever. Now, to be kind of mindful of your time, and I've only
Hmm.
booked you here for half an hour.
Right.
For people who are watching this and they're like, I like what you're saying,
Yeah.
where's the best place for them to connect with you? Where should they reach out to you?
Right. Yeah. I think you should do it on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
You could through Facebook if you want.
Right.
That's
Not
okay.
not Tinder then.
I am dating. However, uh, and I recommend you go look up the Cold Star Project. It's on YouTube under the Cold Star Technologies channel, and it's also on the audio versions on every major platform, the Spotify and iTunes. The Cold Star Project, and you can look at our website at coldstartech.com.
Awesome. On that
Mhm.
note, Jason Kanigan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.